We will focus on Manson himself, his life, his psyche, and how he turned from a troubled child into a spree murderer and infamous cult leader.
In part 2, we'll broaden our focus from Charles Manson to the cult he founded, known as the Manson family, or simply the family. We'll learn about the different members of this cult and the tactics Manson used to transform ordinary young people from law-abiding optimists into cold-hearted killers.
Due to the graphic nature of this cult's crimes, listener discretion is advised. This episode includes dramatizations and discussions of murder and assault that some people may find offensive. We advise extreme caution for children under 13.
I am special. I am not like the average inmate. I have put 5 people in the grave. I've been in prison most of my life. I am a very dangerous man.
Those are the ominous words of one of America's most dangerous killers. This is a murderer so charismatic and manipulative that his murder weapon of choice was not guns, knives, or axes. It was other human beings. I'm speaking, of course, of Charles Manson, uniquely infamous for murder by proxy. At his direction, members of Manson's cult, known as the Family, murdered 7 people. The most famous of these murders took place at 10050 Cielo Drive in Beverly Hills. This was the home of the beautiful and hardworking actor named Sharon Tate, and her husband, the famous young director named Roman Polanski. On August 9th of 1969, Sharon was 8 months pregnant with the couple's first child, and had friends checking in on her and keeping her company while Polanski was away in Europe shooting a movie. At the end of the night, Sharon, her 4 friends, and her unborn child would all be dead at the hands of Charles Manson's followers. The shocking murder of a pregnant young actress sent Hollywood into a panic and embedded the crime in the public's consciousness. This horrific crime was followed a day later by the murders of Rosemary and Lena LaBianca. Once again, Manson didn't have to lift a finger. He aimed his followers like a gun, and they slaughtered mercilessly. In 2 consecutive days, the Manson family killed 7 people.
Manson wasn't a serial killer. He didn't stab or strangle his victims like John Wayne Gacy. He was a cult leader, charismatic enough to manipulate his followers into committing murder on his behalf.
And it's Manson's role as a cult leader and his ability to commit murder by proxy that makes him so memorable. How was he able to convince seemingly normal, middle-class men and women to obey his every word? And how did Manson, the neglected child of a teenage mother, grow up to lead one of the deadliest cults in America?
Before we get into what made Manson such an effective cult leader, we need to understand what a cult is. It's a controversial term to define because there has never been a single agreed-upon definition of what constitutes a cult.
Vanessa's going to take over on the psychology here and throughout the episode. Please note, Vanessa is not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist, but she's done a lot of research for the show.
Thanks, Craig. One way of defining a cult is as a religion that differs significantly from the mainstream or from the religion it claims to be a part of. For example, a cult of Christianity is a cult that ostensibly behaves like it is a Christian religion, yet its central tenets undermine or contradict essential elements of the Bible or traditional Christianity. Quite a few American religions fit this definition for a cult of Christianity. But Christianity isn't the only religion that cults base their beliefs on. There are cults inspired by Buddhism, Taoism, Judaism, Islam, and other mainstream religions. Some experts don't even like to use the term cult, and instead prefer the term NRM, or New Religious Movement, because a new religious movement is not inherently malevolent or dangerous. And it's important to note that not all cults are based on religion. Under the broader definition of cult, die-hard fans of television shows and singers could qualify. However, for the purposes of our show, we will be using the word cult to refer to what the psychiatrist Robert Lifton calls a destructive cult. Destructive cults are defined as cults that systematically harm and kill others or themselves.
There have been cult leaders throughout history, but destructive cult leaders didn't start getting widely noticed and recognized as such by the American public until the 1960s and 1970s. Charles Manson was one of the first cult leaders in modern American history to gain notoriety.
Margaret Singer, another psychologist famous for studying cults, believed that the key to identifying a destructive cult was to look at the origin of a cult and the role of its leader. In order to really understand Manson's family, we need to first look at how Charles Manson came to create the cult in the first place.
Although he would eventually found one of the most infamous cults in modern history, Charles Manson came from humble origins. Charles Manson's grandmother, Nancy Maddox, was a deeply religious woman, a fundamentalist Christian. She interpreted the Bible literally. Nancy and her husband Charlie had a happy life together with their children in Ashland, Ohio. Her children included Glenna, Eileen, Luther, and her youngest daughter, Ada Kathleen.
But tragedy soon struck the family. Nancy's husband Charlie died in 1931 of pneumonia. Only 2 years later, young Eileen also died of chest congestion shortly after graduation from business school. After the loss of her husband and daughter, Nancy became even more religious. She wanted her youngest daughter, Ada Kathleen, to grow up to be a moral and pious young woman. However, Ada Kathleen, who we will now refer to as Kathleen, wasn't interested in following in her mother's footsteps. She didn't want to dress modestly and go to church. She wanted to wear fashionable clothes to go to the movies and attend dances. She wanted to have fun like other girls her age.
Kathleen began to sneak over from Ashland to bordering Irontown so she could attend dance clubs, with her mother none the wiser. She met a handsome 23-year-old man by the name of Colonel Scott. Kathleen and Scott soon began dating. Kathleen hid the relationship from her mother, but Scott was hiding a bigger secret from Kathleen. He was actually married. When Kathleen became pregnant in 1934, Scott was quick to abandon the young teen. Kathleen wanted a father for her baby and settled on a man by the name of William Manson.
On November 12, 1934, Kathleen gave birth to a boy whom she named Charles Mills Manson. Charles, after her father, and Manson after her new husband. Kathleen was still a teenager at heart. The 16-year-old didn't want to spend much time being a mother. She began leaving Charles with relatives so she could go out and party. Sometimes Kathleen would disappear for days with her brother Luther. Nancy began to worry that her two children were working together to rob people. Sadly for Nancy, her fears would soon be proven right.
William Manson quickly grew sick of Kathleen's disappearances and divorced her in 1937. Kathleen couldn't care less. She was busy taking Charles Manson's biological father, Colonel Scott, to court to force him to pay child support. But $25 was all she'd ever get from Manson's biological father. Colonel Scott wanted nothing to do with his son.
Did Charles grow up to resent his biological father for abandoning him? It's hard to say for sure, but an unsolved murder that took place in 1969 has some people theorizing that maybe Charles did hold a grudge against his father.
In May of 1969, mere months before the Tate LaBianca killings, Ashland detectives found a man viciously stabbed to death in his home, a kitchen knife left sticking out of his body. The man's identity? Darwin Scott, Colonel Scott's brother and Charles Manson's uncle.
Given that the Tate murders were in part a result of Manson's feelings of resentment and desire for revenge, it's easy to suspect that Manson might resent the father who never cared about him and who made no effort to save Manson from an unhappy childhood.
But before Manson became a vengeful cult leader, he was a deeply troubled child. In August of 1939, when Charles was 4 years old, his mother Kathleen and his uncle Luther teamed up to rob a man named Frank Martin.
After a night of drinking, Kathleen and Luther lured Martin to a gas station, then assaulted and robbed him. They did a terrible job of hiding their identities, and police quickly arrested them.
Charles may have watched as police arrested and took his mother away. In the fall of 1939, a judge sentenced Kathleen to 5 years in prison for her role in the robbery.
With Charles' mother in prison, his family members needed to figure out who should care for the young boy. It was decided that he should stay with his mother's sister, Glenna, and her husband, Bill, and his 8-year-old cousin, Joanne. because they lived the closest to the prison where Charles' mother, Kathleen, was incarcerated. So Charles moved to McMecken, a small middle-class town where almost everyone worked for the mines or the railroad.
By the time he moved to McMecken, Charles was already creating problems for his family. He was smaller than other boys his age, but he made up for it by misbehaving. He always wanted to be the center of attention and would act out when ignored. Punishing and whipping Charles for bad behavior didn't seem to have any effect on him.
Lies were like breathing for 5-year-old Charles, and whenever he was caught in a lie, he would always blame someone else.
Bullies picked on Charles due to his tiny frame and his propensity to talk back to them. Charles' 8-year-old cousin, Joanne, was expected to watch out for him. One time, Charles got in an argument with a larger boy who promptly began beating him up. Joanne rushed to Charles' defense and bit the older boy's finger, scaring him off.
Teachers were surprised that a mild-mannered girl like Joanne would get into a playground fight. She explained to teachers that the larger boy was bullying her cousin Charles, so she defended him. But when teachers tried to confirm Joanne's story with Charles, he lied and said that he wasn't involved.
Luckily for Joanne, the teachers knew Charles was a habitual liar. They believed her. But the young girl now saw her cousin for what he was, a liar who was always willing to put the blame on anyone but himself.
But Joanne became outright afraid of her cousin after an incident that took place when she was 10 and Charles was 7. Her parents needed to go out for the day, and Joanne was expected to babysit Charles and do the housework. Charles not only refused to help Joanne with her chores, he brought a sickle blade he found in the yard into the house and purposely disrupted her own attempt to do housework. When he refused to stop, Joanne kicked Charles outside and locked the screen door.
Charles' response was terrifying. He screamed and slashed the door with his blade. The look in his eyes was horrifying, and Joanne was convinced that he planned to cut her with the blade if he got back inside.
Even at this early age, Manson was showing signs of just how dangerous he could be.
You know, Charles Manson kind of reminds me of Ted Bundy.
Oh, or that one story about how supposedly his aunt woke up from a nap to find that 3-year-old Bundy had surrounded her with knives?
You read my mind.
Well, it was a pretty memorable episode of Serial Killers.
I still get chills thinking about it. How a killer can exhibit these early warning signs but not have gotten the psychological help they needed.
Yeah, but in Bundy's case, minus a few incidents like that, he seemed so normal for so much of his life. It's not all black and white with Bundy or with Manson.
That's a good point. Now, for those of you who don't know, Vanessa and I are also fascinated with serial killers. And we host another Parcast podcast where we talk about the psychology of the world's worst killers.
It's called Serial Killers.
Well, we like to keep things simple here at Parcast, at least for podcasts. We've talked about the Toolbox Killers, the Ken and Barbie Killers.
Oh, and don't forget the redneck Charles Manson. If you're interested in Charles Manson, you have got to hear about Donald Henry Gaskins.
He was so hell-bent on destruction, he managed to keep committing murder even after he was in prison.
It's a crazy story. If you're interested in listening to Serial Killers, you can find us wherever you're listening to Cults. On Apple Podcasts, Google Play, TuneIn, Spotify, SoundCloud, Parcast.com, you name it. A new episode comes out every Monday.
And while we're on the topic of murder investigations, we found a really interesting and fun way for you to put your own investigative skills to the test.
We sure did, Greg. For those of you who are fascinated by murder and investigations, you've got to check out Hunt a Killer. Hunt a Killer is an interactive murder mystery subscription box that's delivered right to your door each month.
They send clues, correspondence, and items that put you into a serial killer's mind. You can work on deciphering the clues on your own, or you can join the conversation online with over 40,000 other people who are all working on solving the same murder mystery alongside you.
So the investigation really is interactive. If you're interested in signing up, you can head to huntakiller.com right now to register. Once you're accepted, they'll send your first episode out that same day with no shipping charges.
Best of all, to help support our show, Hunt a Killer is offering a 10% discount for our listeners. Just go to www.huntakiller.com and use the code CULTS to get 10% off. But enough about other killers. Let's get back on topic to Charles Manson.
Right. We were just talking about how he threatened his cousin with a knife when he was a kid.
Charles Manson's behavior was troubling even as a young boy.
In an adult, some of the traits that Charles Manson exhibited as a young boy might be considered consistent with symptoms of psychopathy, a condition commonly found in cult leaders. Psychopaths usually demonstrate traits of what psychologist Robert Hare has labeled aggressive narcissism. These traits include pathological lying, an inflated sense of self, a tendency to charm or manipulate others for personal gain, failure to accept responsibility, impulsivity, irresponsibility, lack of empathy, and shallow emotional affect, which means they don't feel emotions as strongly and the emotions pass by quickly. Other traits psychopaths exhibit are a lack of realistic goals, poor control over their temper, a tendency to be easily bored and seek out stimulation, a parasitic lifestyle where they leech off of others, and criminal behavior.
So was Charles Manson a child psychopath?
Well, psychiatrists don't like to label children as psychopaths. They instead prefer to say that children exhibit callous and unemotional traits, namely the ones I just described. Callous and unemotional children are, according to one study, up to 3 times more likely to become criminals and adult psychopaths. It's also been suggested in studies that psychopaths commit up to half of all violent crimes. Another interesting thing about callous and unemotional children is that they don't respond at all to punishment. Their brains are wired in such a way that they are completely indifferent to it.
So how does Manson's childhood behavior stack up against the behaviors of callous and unemotional children?
Now, I can't diagnose Manson, but many of the traits Manson exhibited in his childhood bear a strong resemblance to callous and unemotional traits: pathological lying, blaming others, becoming easily bored, an inability to control his temper, and an indifference to being punished by his family members.
So do these callous and unemotional traits explain Manson's behavior?
Well, not necessarily. It's important to note that Manson may have not been suffering from any diagnosable mental illness, including the cluster of callous and unemotional traits that, if left unchecked, can develop into adult psychopathy.
How is it possible that Manson doesn't suffer from mental illness? Aren't all mass murderers mentally ill?
Well, a widely believed misconception is that most spree killers suffer from mental illness. Dr. Michael Stone, a New York psychologist, decided to study how many spree killers actually suffer from mental illness and created a database of over 200 mass murderers.
So how many were mentally ill?
Well, 25% showed indications that they suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. These are the killers whose murders could have been prevented if they were properly diagnosed and given the correct medications to treat their hallucinations. Another 25% of them indicated they suffered from a mixture of depression and callous and unemotional traits, which means that in addition to possessing a lack of empathy, these killers also possessed a strong feeling of despondency. Half of the spree killers showed no clear signs of a specific, diagnosable mental illness.
But there has to be something that separates spree killers from normal law-abiding citizens.
Well, yeah, many spree killers might have elements of different mental disorders like narcissism and paranoia, but these elements may not be strong enough to qualify as mental illness. So, Charles Manson may have exhibited behaviors as a child that resemble callous and unemotional traits without actually suffering.
The Mona Lisa. We've all seen it, but have you ever really examined it? It's just a woman sitting in a chair in front of a balcony. She looks vaguely amused or annoyed.
What seems simple at first quickly changes into something more complicated. The details slowly begin to pop out at you. Take, for instance, the woman's body. Her hands are folded over in her lap. The hands themselves aren't delicate like many portraits from the time, but thick and well-worn. These aren't the usual hands of a well-to-do woman paying a high price for a fancy portrait.
Examine her eyes. The lids are heavy. The anatomical detail is precise, revealing some marks and imperfections on the eyelids. Could she be tired or ill?
And have you ever noticed the veil? Yes, a faint, black veil hangs over Lisa's head. almost in holy levitation.
Now expand your vision outward. Take in the woman's full posture. Do you notice the three-quarters turn of her body, almost as if she was in motion? As if we caught her in the midst of turning to face us.
This was a subtle and revolutionary detail for portraits, and Leonardo da Vinci popularized it.
Finally, perhaps the most neglected by the common observer is the background. It's a high aerial perspective, almost an impossible one, as if Mona Lisa was a fairy tale queen stashed away in the highest tower.
The land has a fantastic aspect to it, a mythic quality often missing from Renaissance portraits that more often than not just featured scenic views of Milan, Florence, or some other metropolis.
All in all, the deeper one travels into the Mona Lisa, the more otherworldly it appears. A simple portrait reveals unexamined depths and shades of mystery. Some believe the painting was designed to intentionally confuse and mislead the observer.
Others say quite the opposite, that Leonardo painted her in this way to reveal something.
Whether that something is a hidden code or message, or simply a truth about the human soul, more debates rage on, constantly spawning off the back of one another, seemingly inexhaustible and endless.
This search has driven scientists to do everything from excavating ancient bones to seek confirmation of identity, to developing specialized technology to examine the intricacies of the work itself.
Despite the complexities of the search, the heart of the mystery remains the same across centuries and generations. Who is she? And what is she? And what is Leonardo telling us?
The Mona Lisa comes to us from the dawn of modern civilization. Whatever secrets it might hold, the questions will always be more important.
Perhaps that is why Mona Lisa's smile aggravates and stimulates so many. It's as if life's secrets were just whispered in her ear, and the rest of us can only see the beginning of her reaction.
One thing is certain. If anyone did know the secret, it was Leonardo da Vinci.
But Leonardo himself was not such a simple and transparent man. In fact, he was the opposite.
If we wish to discover the truth about Mona Lisa, we must first examine the life and mind of Leonardo. Only from there can we follow his paintbrush to the poplar wood canvas so infamous today. In life, there's so much we don't know. But in this podcast, we don't take "we don't know" for an answer. Every week, we investigate the greatest mysteries of history and life on Earth.
Welcome to Unexplained Mysteries. I'm your host, Richard.
And I'm your host, Claire. If you like the show, you can subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. A new episode comes out every Thursday. While you're there, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review. It seems simple, but it really helps our show.
You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram @Parcast, on Twitter @Parcast Network, and at parcast.com. There are two major questions that drive the mystery around the Mona Lisa that we will aim to answer. One, who exactly was this woman that Leonardo da Vinci painted?
And two, what was the reason behind that smile? That smile that seems to flitter in and out of existence, depending on how the viewer casts a glance at the painting. That smile that has driven some to the edge of madness and back.
Inventor.
Painter.
Cartographer and draftsman.
Engineer.
Sculptor, musician, mathematician, one of the fathers of geology and hydrology, and, well, you get it.
To many, Leonardo da Vinci was the Renaissance and humanist ideal. He represented the synthesis of natural philosopher and master technician.
In the words of art historian Helen Gardner, quote, "His mind and personality seem to us superhuman, while the man himself remains remote and mysterious," end quote.
He was born in April of 1452 in the Tuscan hill town of Vinci. His father, Piero Fruosino di Antonio, was a respected legal notary. His mother, Caterina, was a peasant. Needless to say, he was an illegitimate child and as such, received no true surname. After a youth spent in idle daydream, teenage Leonardo was hired by his father Piero to paint the wooden shield of a local soldier. The decorated shield was so beautiful that Piero decided to sell it for a profit instead. It eventually made it all the way to the collection of the Duke of Milan.
Piero decided that perhaps Leonardo had a future in this business, so at age 14 he was shipped to the Florence bottega of famed artist Verrocchio in 1466.
After a full immersion in Renaissance philosophy and technique, Leonardo was qualified as a master in the Guild of St. Luke for artists and doctors in 1472.
Over the course of his career, Leonardo would serve as an artist for the Duke of Milan, an engineer and military inventor for the Pope's son, Cesare Borgia, a religious painter for Pope Leo X himself, and a celebrated court artisan for King Francis I of France. His interests and skills expanded exponentially in many different directions.
That said, all of these diverse pursuits revolved around the pursuit of pure knowledge. This was the dawn of natural philosophy, otherwise known as the real conception of modern science. In the mind of Leonardo, observation and experimentation became paramount over theory.
He was a Christian humanist through and through, believing that the perfect dignity and beauty that existed in Christ existed in everyone. Leonardo infused this philosophy with everything in his life, from paintings to technical sketches.
His famous sketch, Vitruvian Man, is a perfect example. The sketching lays out a human figure within a classical framework of ideal proportions.
Yet there's soul here, too. That's why it still resonates. It's not just a medical or anatomical diagram, but a piece of art.
This came from Leonardo's first teacher, Verrocchio. He made sure all of his students gained an appreciation for the human form, and Leonardo gained an obsession with anatomy.
By the end of the century, he spent a lot of time inside the Hospital of Santa Maria Nuova in Florence, dissecting corpses.
Leonardo wanted to see exactly how the human body functioned. Instead of making wild theories like other natural philosophers of the time, he created detailed diagrams and notations, over 240 sketches in total.
Through this practice, Leonardo's prime fascination became the vascular system and the reproductive system. He was searching for the source of all life and figured these two systems seemed to be the keys.
He made some of the first detailed sketches of the heart and its surrounding vessels, and what was potentially the first drawing of a fetus within the womb.
At the time, females were considered non-actors in the reproductive process, outside of their capacity as a vessel for the unborn child. But Leonardo thought differently. In his papers not published until long after his death, he advanced controversial thoughts about the importance of the seed or egg inside of women. He believed women were the true fountains of life in humankind.
Leonardo believed there was a hidden connection between body and mind. If bodies were created in the image of God, were not human expressions themselves divine? Was there not cosmic truth in a smile or a sideways glance?
All of these thoughts went unexpressed in public during his life, but they were expressed in his painting practice.
This led to Leonardo adding all sorts of nuance to his work. He played with perspective, light, and position. No matter if he was creating a traditional narrative tableau, as he did in The Last Supper, or a more impressionistic portrait, like John the Baptist.
This love for small details inspired something in his historical wake. Mystery, and with it, conspiracy.
There's good reason to suspect such from Leonardo. The most extensive biography written about him from his time period is only 12 pages long.
Although we do have the records Leonardo left of himself. Some of Leonardo's idle sketches involved early designs for tanks, parachutes, and helicopters. His writings about water's effect on the shape of landscape influenced all study of hydrology and geology to come.
A man with a mind like that, he must have known some secrets.
Why else would he have practiced mirror writing?
Much of Leonardo's found writings are scrawled backwards, right to left. The best way to decipher it clearly is to reflect it in a mirror. It's not the hardest code to crack, but the fact that he wrote nearly everything this way seems that Leonardo did not want just anyone reading over his shoulder.
He valued secrets. Perhaps in some ways he even fetishized them, hoping to create mysteries all around him while he kept busy pursuing his ultimate truths.
But it wasn't until espionage and spycraft reached the consciousness of everyday citizens in the 20th century that Leonardo's artwork went under the microscope.
The 1982 book was called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. It was an investigative and speculative non-fiction work centered on documents discovered in Paris's Bibliothèque Nationale. Keep in mind the validity of these documents and the hypotheses made in both Holy Blood and its fictional spiritual successor, the Da Vinci Code, have come under massive scrutiny. But it's important to examine as it kicked off a new wave of interest in Leonardo as a master of hidden codes.
The Bibliothèque documents pointed to the existence of a secret society known as the Priory of Sion, a name dating back to an order of monks from 1116 AD.
And it appeared that at the turn of the 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci was their leader.
Holy Blood, Holy Grail believed the Priory of Sion held on to one truly important secret. It claimed that the Priory was safeguarding this secret until the time came to unveil it in Israel.
But Leonardo may have decided to reveal that secret himself. Let's take a short break. We've got a recommendation for you.
If you're enjoying today's episode of Unexplained Mysteries, there's another great Parcast podcast we know you'll love called Conspiracy Theories.
Every Wednesday, our friends Carter and Molly investigate the world's most complicated and controversial events.
Through captivating storytelling, they take a deeper look into the official versions of the events and theories that surround them.
You can check out episodes on Area 51, chemtrails, and the death of Princess Diana now. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Search for Conspiracy Theories wherever you listen to podcasts, or visit parcast.com/conspiracy to start listening now. That's Parcast, PARCAST.com/conspiracy to listen now.
And if you love great storytelling, you'll find an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more on Audible. Audiobooks are a simple way to help build a better you. Whether you want to feel healthier, find motivation, or learn something new, Audible has all the audio content you need to start your year on the right foot.
Whether it's on your phone, through your car, or at home on an Amazon Echo, you can access thousands of books while doing almost anything. If you want to be entertained, we recommend trying out books like Sherlock Holmes, The Alienist, The Devil in the White City, and A Short History of Nearly Everything.
Start a 30-day trial, and your first audiobook is free. Go to audible.com/unexplained or text unexplained to 500-500. That's audible.com/unexplained or text unexplained to 500-500 for a 30-day trial and free first audiobook. You can do it with audiobooks.
Now, let's get back to the story. While under the household of the Duke of Milan in 1495, the 43-year-old Leonardo da Vinci set to work on his first timeless masterpiece, The Last Supper.
According to Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the Sion documents of Leonardo pointed to a message hidden within the frame of Jesus' last night.
This theory, of course, was truly popularized decades later in the worldwide bestseller, The Da Vinci Code.
Both the nonfiction and fiction book posit that Leonardo used his mastery of painting technique to encode the secret of the Priory of Sion in this fresco mural.
The theory is as follows. The disciple, generally taken to be John, is actually a woman. A very specific woman.
The layout of the disciples themselves, now so ingrained in public imagination, points out the woman's identity.
See how the disciples are arranged like two hills, rising and falling, forming the letter M.
Mary Magdalene, the redeemed sex worker who was actually, according to these books, the wife of Jesus Christ, and most importantly, the mother of his children.
This was the secret of the Priory of Sion. Why would Leonardo da Vinci, a supposed leader in this secret group, hide such a message in his painting?
Perhaps it was a tantalizing joke, a clue left for those who would follow. The novel The Da Vinci Code turns this into a globe-trotting conspiracy revolving around the progeny of Christ. This fiction stretches the theory pretty far, but it's based on the bibliothèque documents.
Again, these documents should not be taken as scripture. As we'll learn next week, they may have been the result of a much different type of conspiracy. But they succeeded in one way, instilling the idea that Leonardo was always filling his work with secrets.
The Last Supper wasn't the first or last painting to be put under such scrutiny.
It was only a matter of time until the most popular of his works became conspiracy of its own.
The nagging question of Mona Lisa's identity suddenly became something much more powerful and troubling. What is the Mona Lisa trying to communicate to us? Known in America as the Mona Lisa, and nearly everywhere else as La Gioconda, the painting has the highest known insurance valuation for a piece of art, currently standing at $800 million. This trumps other high-priced works like Paul Cézanne's The Card Players at $260 million and Edvard Munch's The Scream at $120 million.
It sits behind bulletproof glass, illuminated with state-of-the-art lighting, inside the Musée du Louvre in Paris. At other points in time, it resided in the palace at Versailles, Napoleon's bedroom at Tuileries, and strangest of all, the nook beneath a dirty stove in an anonymous Parisian apartment.
6 million people make the pilgrimage to Paris to see it every year. Over the course of the 20th century, the image has been repurposed in over 300 other artworks and 2,000 advertisements.
But for all that, we aren't even sure how the painting came about.
First, there is the question of the timeline.
Leonardo's first biographer, Giorgio Vasari, wrote this in 1550. Quote, "Around 1503, Leonardo undertook to paint for Francesco del Giocondo the portrait of Mona Lisa, his wife." End quote. This is the first time Leonardo is mentioned in connection to the portrait that may have become the famous painting.
Note that Mona, in this sense, is spelled with two N's. It derives from the Italian Madonna, which itself became both Madonna, like the singer, and Mona. Only in America has it transformed into Mona with a single N. Yet another case of the mystery woman's shifting identity.
When researchers uncovered documents in 2005 verifying Vasari's claim that the painting was started in either 1503 or 1504 in Florence, it was a big deal. Finally, art historians had reliable evidence to a potential origin for the Mona Lisa.
Check out this clip from the Mysterious Radio Archives on Patreon.
The phenomena is undeniable, right? People are indeed seeing something unidentified. Do you think those could be some type of advanced military aircraft?
Well, I've often thought about it. If it is advanced military aircraft, they have such capabilities that I don't know how we came up with them unless we reverse engineered them from alien technology, because it's simply, we can't account for it. They seem to violate the laws of physics as we know them. So whatever's going on, whatever they're capable of doing, seems to be far beyond anything we have today. And it always seems to have been that way. It always seems to have been well beyond our capabilities. It's amazing really what some of these things can do. They can go into water, they can go in air, we see them in space, we see them around the moon. They flip and dart. They seem to defy the laws of inertia, of gravity, you name it. So whatever they're using to run these things, it's something I don't think we have yet.
It's just incredible, some of the things that they've been captured doing. Now, have you had any genuine photos submitted to you or video that you can say, or you say to yourself, now this is undoubtedly real?
Oh, absolutely. The only problem, I mean, what we do in MUFON is we get photographs, and if they're of a decent quality, the state director, Lakita Adams, has them sent to a specialist who determines if they've been touched up in any way or altered in any way. And we have a number of photos that we know have not been altered. The pictures are as they were taken, and they seem to show things that we simply can't account for, UFOs. Are they from outer space? Are they from another dimension? I don't know, but wherever they're from, they're not from here, I don't think.
So, Rob, do you guys take any precautions or any type of vetting, okay, to see if the picture is actually, make sure it's real, it's not a hoax, someone just pulling your leg? I mean, what do you do in that case, as far as questionable photos are concerned?
Well, questionable photos often end up being discounted. We have to write summaries of our reports. We do field investigations. We contact the person. We talk to them directly. We will go out to the site where the person witnessed what was happening. We look at the area around the site. For instance, one of my areas was over near an airport in Raleigh, and I had to discount the woman's sighting simply because I felt that it was too close to the airport, the weather conditions were poor, and therefore what she saw probably was part of an airplane as it was circling through the clouds. She is convinced it is not, and I'm not sure I'm right. But whenever there is a situation where it's a little bit questionable, we have to err on the side of caution. So we just discount all those sort of sightings. We're so glad that these people report them, because you never know, And it could well have been a real sighting. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm just saying for reporting purposes, we had to discount it.
I'm wondering for the North Carolina, for the state of North Carolina, are you getting any reports of abductions?
We are getting reports of people having contact, close encounters of the third kind. We have had a number of people who have claimed abductions. We have referred them to other people, including psychiatrists and psychologists, not because we think we're crazy, but because we think they need to deal with professionals when it comes to this sort of thing. We do have, or did have until recently, I believe, a hypnotist who was a member of our local state MUFON group here, and we relied on her. But I personally am not a big fan of hypnotism. I think it's considered to be suggestion, and it's so easily to suggest something, and the person then promptly remembers it as being real, and it becomes a real memory to them when it isn't. So I'm not a big fan of hypnotism myself, for instance. As far as investigating these things, we do go to the site, we do take pictures, we do check out the surrounding area, we do interview the people, we do as best we can background checks, we try to get corroborating witnesses, we will use equipment if there's any kind of physical evidence that we will measure, test, take soil samples. We do it as scientifically as possible.
Rob, have you been getting any reports from law enforcement or officials that would be deemed credible?
Well, we do get a lot of sightings. Some of them are from officials, but oddly enough, what we mostly get are referrals from officials. People called into the state police, the Air Force, whatever, and say, I saw something, I want to report it, and they refer them to us, and then that's when we step in and take over. But yeah, sure, we've got sightings that we're convinced, and the summaries say that we're convinced that it was a genuine sighting, and we discount the possibility of it being any known type of standard aircraft of any sort. And basically what we do is it's a process of elimination. We take the evidence and we try to discount what we know it couldn't be, and we can't always find out what it is, but we can always find out usually what it isn't. It's not a jet, a helicopter, a balloon, a candle in a bag floating in the air, or whatever. And then that leaves the unknown, which is a UFO, unidentified.
Okay. Now, have you had a UFO sighting yourself?
I've had two in my life. One was in San Diego. I saw it going overhead. I was with a group of other people at the time, and I said, oh, look. And it looked like a jet that was glowing, was streaking across the sky, and all of a sudden it just sort of came apart. And we wondered what the heck it was, and the next day the headlines of the San Diego Tribune said 50,000 people, I can't think of the name of the stadium, but it was in San Diego, witnessed UFO, space object over the field. So I wasn't alone. There's some 50,000 others who saw it too. The second time was here in Greensboro. It was last year, late last year. I was driving up towards Greensboro, heading north, and I saw an object that I can only describe as a UFO. Silver, spherical, darted around, went up, down, left, right, really quickly. I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a jet, wasn't a helicopter, wasn't a drone, wasn't a dirigible, wasn't a blimp. So again, it is an unidentified flying object.
Now, I'd like to get your opinion on some of the more significant UFO sightings like the Phoenix Lights. Have you viewed that footage? And I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Oh, constantly. And I was witnessing it the whole time it was happening, not there, but I mean, I was paying attention to what was happening, of course. And what annoyed the heck out of me at the time was when the governor went on local television in Phoenix and said, and he had the jerk, I'm going to call him a jerk, in a alien spacesuit come on, and they made a big joke out of it. And then, of course, after the governor retired, then he does come out and says, oh no, it was a real phenomenon, and the only reason I did the alien thing and I regret it now was to try to calm people down because everyone was so afraid. Those lights were real. They were not military. Whatever they were not military. They were seen not only over Phoenix, but near Tucson, and they even apparently went down to Mexico, and they started in the northwestern corner of the state. Whatever this was, it wasn't flares from the local Air Force base. It just wasn't. What it was, again, it was a UFO, and I don't think it was human.
I agree. That footage is incredible. I've watched it many times myself, and I've had Lynn Ketai on the show talking about that as well. It seems to me that these craft or the sightings escalated back in the 60s, I think. Is there something back in that time period, back in the last 30, 40 years that you say absolutely attributed to the amount of sightings that we're seeing today?
Well, first of all, you have to remember UFOs go back a very long time, centuries at least, probably millennia. The reason they seem to be in an upsurge lately is because the population of the Earth has grown by leaps and bounds over the last 100 years. And I mean, when I was born, there was 2.5 billion people in the world. Now we have almost 8 billion. So that gives you an idea of how fast our population has exploded. The more people, the more pairs of eyes are seeing things. The more towns and cities have sprung up in places where they weren't before that can see things. We have video cameras, we have phone cameras, you name it, we have it. So, of course, it does look like the sightings are exploding. I'm not sure if they really are, or if we're just seeing them more because there's more people to see them and more equipment to take the pictures. But yeah, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there have been a lot of sightings. We've had, well, even the 50s too. You have the Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia and Siberia, where people died. You have, sightings by the space shuttle. I mean, I was watching the space shuttle live one time when it was orbiting the Earth, and the commander was a woman. I can't remember her name, unfortunately, but she was floating there in the cabin, and she goes, there's that alien spaceship again. And then immediately the sound cut off, and she's still there, and she's still talking. You can see her mouth moving, but you can't hear what she's saying. Now, I saw this live on television, so there's no doubt in my mind that these things are real and that they're being cut off and switched to civilian channels to continue the conversation. So we've had, when you say have we had any in the last 30 or 40 years, we've had tons. Are they reliable? Yes. Are they real? I believe they absolutely are. And are there repercussions from them? Absolutely. And sometimes those repercussions are deadly.
So I have to ask you, why do you think these aliens are really here?
Access this edition and many more by becoming a Mysterious Radio patron at Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/mysteriousradio to enjoy more and get rewarded with Mysterious Radio merchandise. Check out this clip from the Mysterious Radio archives on Patreon.
All right, I have joining me tonight very special guest, Father Maggio, who is an exorcist, and he is graciously giving us his time tonight to discuss the demonic realm and his experiences dealing with exorcisms. Father, thank you very much for joining me tonight on Mysterious Radio. How are you?
Oh, pretty good.
That's great. Now, just a bit of background, if you don't mind sharing. How did you find your calling as a Catholic priest?
Yeah, that probably went all the way back to when I was 12 years old. There was a priest that the assistant pastor at our parish who was inviting all the 7th graders to go to our local summer camp, Camp Lawrence, in which we would get 2 days out of school. And I think all the boys were interested in becoming a priest at that time, so we all went there, and I think that's when the idea just kind of first got implanted, seeing, that a priest can do fun things, like what he was doing at the summer camp, and, playing games and fishing and, and things like that. So it was kind of to see, good to, for a 7th grader to see that a priest is not always praying all the time and things like that. So.
All right, now, how did the path towards becoming an exorcist happen for you?
Yeah, that was probably kind of by accident. I'm on call when the Catholic priest chaplain for the 2 Methodist hospitals in our area takes a day off, actually 2 days. He gets Friday and Saturday off. So I kind of cover for him for emergencies. And so it was at the North Campus in Gary that when the incident happened in the emergency room at that Methodist hospital, that a Protestant Presbyterian chaplain called me to come in and do an exorcism because it was reported that one of the boys walked up the walls out the emergency room backwards, and so I was called in to do an exorcism. But I said that I would have to do an investigation first. You do sound like you have something there, since it was witnessed by very professional people. So I was willing to, start that investigation, and later on got permission from my bishop to do the exorcism.
Now, was it a nurse that witnessed the one child that walked?
Yeah, it was a social worker assigned to the case, and also the nurse that was in the room at that time.
You said that was the very first case that you were exposed to as far as being an exorcist, right?
Yes.
Did you believe that really happened?
Yeah, because I don't know if, professional people like that would lie. They called in police, it was quite frantic. So I would say, there was, and that's a common thing in an exorcism. It's called levitation. So that's definitely something that could only be explained by the demonic. There's no other, psychological or medical explanation for that. No other really, unless it was a hoax. But see, the grandmother would have to, kind of train, her grandson on how to do this gymnastic type of thing, so, and she also witnessed it, and she described it too, and so it didn't sound like something they were going to try to, hoax everyone on.
Right. Now, for those that haven't heard this one incident, it really is unbelievable when I read it in the newspaper. Can you tell me what were the circumstances of coming into the hospital, and then what happened in that room exactly?
Yeah, it seemed like they were brought into the emergency room. First of all, they were brought in by socials, Child Protective Services, and they went to their doctor because they were missing a lot of school, and they were kind of seeing perhaps like bruises, and they were having bloody, noses, in school, bloody lips and things. And the nurse at the school would kind of look at them, couldn't really figure out what, where the blood was coming from, what was causing all this. Then they started to miss school a bit, and that's when social services came in. So they came in and they wanted the mother and the grandmother to take the children to their doctor to examine them to see what's the problem here. And so it was at the doctor's office that the 2 boys began to act up, kind of saying crazy things like, it's time for everyone to die, and I'm going to kill everyone type of thing, and then they'll kind of roll their head and eyes and things, and then one kind of got picked up and thrown against the wall, and then kind of was like knocked out, and then the other one started to act up. So, and he then passed out, and so it was there that ambulances were called to take them to the hospital.
Access this edition and many more by becoming a Mysterious Radio patron at Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/mysteriousradio to enjoy more and get rewarded with Mysterious Radio merchandise. Check out this clip from the Mysterious Radio archives on Patreon.
My specialist area of interest is the corporate music industry and how it's used for mass mind control, social engineering, and culture creation. It's a truly colossal subject. It's got many different facets to it. I explore many of these in the book that I put out this year, Musical Truth. We can talk about some of those facets today in the time that we have available to us, but we're just not going to be able to get anywhere near to covering the whole thing because it truly is a massive subject. And what struck me a while back was the area that I'm interested in, the music industry and the entertainment industry broadly, which incorporates Hollywood movies as well, is just one aspect of what's going on generally in this realm of existence. And it's just one play out of the mind control and the culture creation and all the rest of it. It expresses itself in so many other ways. You've got the banking and financial industry and the scam that is money with debt attached, you know. You've got all these false flag terror events that are being foisted on us, all the lies and the manipulation and mind control that goes on in the mainstream news. You've got what's happening in food with GM foods and what's happening with chemtrails and fracking and vaccines, the pharmaceutical industry, and all these different facets of the conspiracy, if you want to call it that. And my subject area is just one small part of it. So, you know, for anyone that wants to delve into this whole arena of research, it really is life-changing, and it really can tie you up for hours, days, weeks, months of research. But it's absolutely worth it for anyone that is a genuine truth seeker, because that's why we're here. Why else would we have come?
It is amazing, and I love to hear you talk about it. One thing I would like to discuss with you tonight is Paul McCartney. Many people, and I did come upon this, there's a dentist that's a friend of ours. He's an older gentleman, but he had no clue that this was out here. Okay, he loves Paul McCartney. Many people aren't aware that this notion or of something being off about him spread like wildfire back in the 60s. Can you tell our listeners what that big something is and how the rumor got started?
Sure. Well, let me just tell you a brief anecdote. To make ends meet and pay my bills, I do a job as a private hire driver, basically a taxi driver. So I had someone in the back of the car the other day that was talking about, they were American, and they said, oh, when they get back home to the US, they're going to be attending this big concert, and it's going to be featuring, I think they mentioned Elton John, Tom Jones, and they said, we're going to see Paul McCartney. And I thought to myself, well, you're not, because he died in 1966. You're going to see an individual that the world thinks of as Paul McCartney, who has been assuming that identity for the past 50 years, but it ain't him. And naturally, when people hear that for the first time, the default reaction is to just throw it out because it sounds so ridiculous and absurd that it can't possibly be true. But when you get on the path to truthful research, you realize that it's a very big mistake to just go with that initial emotional response, that gut reaction, because often the truth of a matter is there to be discovered if only you would put the time and the diligence into doing the research. So for anyone that really wants to get to the bottom of this question and establish whether there's any truth to this widespread rumor, then the evidence and the proofs are all there. And it is a subject that, again, can tie you up for days, months, weeks, years, but it's absolutely fascinating. It's a minefield, and I've thrown myself into research in this area very deeply, as have many other researchers. So it's not just me saying this, you know, I'm picking up on what's been around for a very long time, because it was actually in the United States that the rumor that Paul McCartney actually died, the real James Paul McCartney, in 1966 first surfaced, and it gained pretty widespread prominence towards the end of 1969. It broke in September 1969, and there were a bunch of college kids at various educational establishments in the US, most significantly Michigan University, and then one in Des Moines, Iowa, who believed that they'd stumbled across some visual symbolic clues in the sleeve to the Beatles album Abbey Road. And there were also clues embedded in the famous sleeve to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And some of these students started calling up American college radio DJs and sharing these clues that they discovered. So it wasn't just symbolic pictorial clues in these albums. They also believed that they'd uncovered audio clues in the form of backmasking. So backmasking is where you take a piece of an audio recording and you flip it in reverse, and a message can be hidden in the reverse track, but it's only identifiable to the conscious mind when the piece of music is listened to in reverse. This is actually a tenet of Satanism when you really get into it. It's something that was espoused by the notorious dark occultist Aleister Crowley, and he wrote about it in his various writings, most notably the Book of Magic, where he talked about the adept to these secret society mystery school teachings, training themselves to listen to speech backwards and listen to phonograph recordings backwards in order to intuit meaning in hidden messages. So it would appear that this is a tactic that was taken straight from the teachings of Crowley and incorporated into Beatles recordings. It's not just the Beatles that have done it. Many other rock music acts through the years have incorporated backmasking in their recordings. But it was a combination of backmasked messages and these symbolic clues, album sleeves and in photos and stuff, that had turned these college kids onto the idea that McCartney had been replaced. And, you know, if you just leave it at that, you could take the view that maybe these kids were smoking something a bit too strong and maybe they just needed to stay a bit grounded and get on with their studies. But, you know, there's far more to it than that. There is a lot of forensic evidence to, in my mind, confirm the fact that the person we think of in the world today is not the real Paul McCartney. So, you know, where do you want to start with it? I should probably mention that there was an article in Wired magazine in Italy, which came out in 2009, and there were a couple of Italian forensic experts who had worked with the police and the judiciary in solving crimes, and, you know, they were very high up and respected in their field. And they'd heard this rumour, which by that point had been around for 40 years, that the real Paul McCartney had died and was replaced. And they set out to debunk this ridiculous idea once and for all, because they thought it was, you know, just plain stupid, and within 5 minutes they could show that it couldn't possibly be the case. So they got a bunch of photographs of the real Paul McCartney from prior to 1966 and what is said to be the fake, the imposter, the replacement, and they compared things like the facial structure and the distance between the eyes and the shape of the jawline and the shape of the mouth and all of this stuff. And they came to the conclusion at the end of their studies that, in fact, they were looking at two completely different people, and this could not possibly be the same man. We also have evidence in the height of McCartney, who prior to 1966 was a reasonably short guy. He was sort of between 5'7" and 5'8", according to reports. And when you saw him on stage with John Lennon sharing a microphone, they were pretty much the same height, or, you know, he was slightly shorter than Lennon. But post-1966, you notice that in pictures of the Beatles, McCartney, in inverted commas, is towering above Lennon and the other Beatles. And actually, after 1966, Lennon and McCartney never shared a microphone again. And this is cited as one of the reasons why the Beatles quit touring in 1966. Their last concert was in Candlestick Park, San Francisco, in late August 66, and they never played a live show again together, with the exception of that rooftop jam on the EMI Studios rooftop in London in late 1969. You've also got pictures of the original McCartney with his girlfriend from the 1960s, the actress Jane Asher. And again, they're pretty much the same height in photos prior to 1966, but after 66, McCartney is towering above her. He seems to have gained about 3 inches in height. You could say he's wearing Cuban heels, maybe, but, you know, would that be the case in every single picture?
Access this edition and many more by becoming a Mysterious Radio patron at Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/mysteriousradio to enjoy more and get rewarded with Mysterious Radio merchandise. Check out this clip from the Mysterious Radio archives on Patreon.
The whole Earth is carved with all kinds of underground tunnels and systems of all kinds. Turkey is full of them. The United States is full of underground tunnels and bases, but most of those are actually augmented by the military.
All right, so let's talk about Captain Mark Richards. Can you give me some background on him?
Sure. Well, one of the things is his wife, Joanne Richards, is someone who I met and have interviewed as well. And she is on the circuit talking about his work. And in fact, she's going to be speaking. I'll give her a plug. She's speaking at the UFO Con in San Francisco. I think it's March 24th, 25th, and 26th. It's coming up in a couple weeks. And she's a fascinating lady and you know, really lovely person. So she facilitated me being able to meet Mark because strangely enough, I found out about Mark Richards by reading on the internet about his trial and his story prior to Camelot. And at that time, I was writing screenplays, as I said, actually during my lunch hour. And I decided that I would, if I ever got the chance, I would try to interview Mark Richards in jail. He was in jail. And I saw that people on the internet were very skeptical of his story, but for some reason it really resonated with me. And I even tried to get, this is many years ago, and again before Camelot, I tried to get Rich Dolan, who I'd struck up a friendship with online, to come with me to do the interview. But he lived on the East Coast and I lived on the West Coast, and it just didn't logistically ever happen. Once I got into Camelot, you know, we were very busy for many years. And then I guess I stumbled on Joanne, you know, being in touch with her, seeing her on the circuit and so on. And then she had a table at a conference that I went to in the Bay Area one time. So I asked her for an interview. So I interviewed her, and that's before I interviewed Mark. And she arranged for me to, you know, I had to figure out, you have to fill out all these paperwork to go into a prison to interview somebody. So we had to go through all those machinations, and then eventually I did get into the prison, and she accompanied me on, I think she's been there in every interview. I've now done 5 of them. So what happens is I go to the prison where he's being held, which in this case is Vacaville, Northern California. It's actually the supporters of Camelot that make this possible, because they contribute to me financially so I can spend the money to drive. I live in Southern California, so I have to drive up to Northern California, stay the night in a hotel. The next day go and interview him. And then usually I drive back home the same night, but sometimes I stay one more night at a hotel. It really depends on my stamina. But when I interview him, we go really early in the morning to the prison. We have to stand in line and go through these checks and all this kind of stuff. And you go into a large prison room where there's tons of prisoners meeting their family. And it's quite loud, but we get a little table and chairs, and we just sit there, and I pepper him with questions nonstop for, sometimes it's 4 hours straight, sometimes it's 2 or 3 hours, depends on the logistics of the situation. And Joanne sometimes helps take notes. We're not allowed to have a pen. I'm not allowed to have a recording device, although I'm still trying to push on that and see if there's some way. Because I think TV crews get to go in and interview prisoners somehow. I don't know how they get by the red tape, but I've still not been able to do it. He's a fabulous man. He's very well spoken, you know, very well read, highly intelligent, carries himself like a military guy. He's well respected at the prison for being, you know, captain in the Navy. And so that's the story, kind of how I get in touch with him. His background is that his father was in the secret space program. His father was a a famous officer in the Air Force called the Dutchman. And he spent some of his childhood visiting England and also other European countries with his family. But he learned at his father's feet, I guess you might say, and then eventually got recruited as a young man. The secret space program seeing great potential in him. And actually, that early story I don't know as much about as I'd like to. So maybe I'll make that a subject for my next interview. But I know Joanne's covered some of it. He's written quite a bit. There's a website. If you go to the front page of Camelot and you scroll down, you'll see there's a link to Joanne's website where she has documents that are like written essays that he's produced over the years. And so you can read a lot of these stories in his writing there. And she sells them for like really cheap, like, $5 or something ridiculous. So that's kind of what's going on. I mean, he was in the secret space program for about, I'd say, he was really in it since he was a teenager. And he has even anecdotal stories about that time. But officially, maybe he was in it for about 25 to 30 years. Then he was framed for murder in Marin County for the death of somebody. Was a man, and 2 other men actually did the killing, but they blamed the plotting of it, the mastermind, on Mark. And Mark was actually off planet during this time, but nonetheless, that's not a great alibi. And basically what happened was what is in essence the reptilian regime, that the Nazi reptilians that are running our country anyway, and the planet to some degree, turned against him and knew that he was going to be a whistleblower in the future. So they framed him to get him into jail, to shut him up, basically. And I am the only journalist who's gone and interviewed him in person and released those interviews. There is at least one other researcher I know who has met with him, but I don't think and I interviewed him as well. His name is Julian Salt. He's British, I believe, and I interviewed him in Britain briefly on one of my interviews about his interactions with Mark. Everything that Mark ever told him, he checked out, and he found out to be true. So that's another person, but as far as I know, it was like a one-on-one, just personal relationship. It wasn't something where he went public. And so that's kind of the background.
Okay, all right. Sounds great. Thank you for that. And so what is the Luciferian Alliance, and how does that relate to the secret space program?
The Luciferian Alliance would be the Illuminati, the Anunnaki, Draco, reptilians, and it is more involved than I can say at this time, because as many people know, I interviewed a woman named Ashiana Dean, who originally went under the name of Anna Hayes. She released 2 volumes of a very important book called Voyagers, and recently then updated the Voyager 2 book, which is highly recommended but very hard to get, and I think sells now for hundreds of dollars on Amazon. I don't know if she's going to re-release it, so people can get hold of these things, but I have the books, and I interviewed her and she has written a history that was downloaded to her that is so involved about all of the interactions with various ET races and humans over the centuries, even beyond settling Earth and seeding Earth and the various seedings, what they call seedings of humanity on Earth. So when you get into the Luciferian Alliance, it's fairly involved because of the races that are part of it. And some of them come and go, and treaties get broken, and all this kind of thing goes on. But nonetheless, the overall story about that would be, the infiltration of planet Earth by this sort of, you could call it a contingent of reptilians and Draco and Illuminati, who are Satanists as well. In the end, their link-up would be blood sacrifice. It would be, of course, the Dracos and reptilians feeding off the energies, the orgone of humanity, and then on top of it, the blood, that they live off of and raise. And so there is a link up between these Satanist Luciferians as well. Luciferians also believe some certain certain things about Marduk coming back, who is in essence a kind of Satan-like figure, who is an Anunnaki. There are some twisted, what I consider to be some twisted views of who's who in the whole pantheon of ET races and all this kind of thing. So some people see Enki and Enlil, the brothers, talked about in Zachariah Sitchin's work as, certainly they're known as Anunnaki, but some see them as Draco, or actually reptilians, or reptilian reptilian humanoid hybrids. I have reason to believe they're humanoid, and it's you can see this in Iran in the depictions on the temple walls, as well as in Egypt. But they have been infiltrated, as we have been infiltrated by the reptilians. So you start to see mixtures in their race, from what I understand, called the Syrian Anunnaki. And so anyway, I know this is a convoluted answer to your question, but it is fairly involved. So all of that ends up into getting infiltrated into what is the secret space program.
Access this edition and many more by becoming a Mysterious Radio patron at Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/mysteriousradio to enjoy more and get rewarded with Mysterious Radio merchandise. Check out this clip from the Mysterious Radio archives on Patreon.
Castanio is recognized as one of the foremost authorities in the supernatural and occult, and in the world of paranormal research. She is an expert in folklore, legends, and haunted history of her hometown, New Orleans. She is also author of Haunting Tales of New Orleans and Volume 1, History, Legends, and Lore. She is also contributor of the Hoodoo Almanac and Hoodoo and Conjure New Orleans magazine. What you may not have known is Eileen's work in the occult and paranormal fields is the natural result of...
Thanks to HelloFresh.com for supporting this episode of Those Conspiracy Guys. Receive $30 off your first week of deliveries when you go to HelloFresh.com and use the offer code TCG30. That's $30 off just for being a fan of our show. So go to HelloFresh.com and use the offer code TCG30 to get $30 off your first week of deliveries. Thanks, HelloFresh. On this episode of Those Conspiracy Guys, we knock back the applesauce of truth and place a sheer purple shroud of Inquisition over our heads as we examine the biggest mass suicide on US soil ever, the people involved, and the aftermath that followed. That's right, this one is Heaven's Gate. In 1972, Marshall Herb Applewhite met nurse Bonnie Lou Nettles in a psychiatric hospital. And like many great relationships that begin this way, they've decided to become a matriarch and patriarch of a UFO cult based around technology, extraterrestrials, mysticism, and theosophy. So after just 21 years since its creation, in 1997, 39 members of this cult were found dead in a Californian mansion, dressed in identical black pajamas after ingesting phenobarbital-laced applesauce and washing it down with vodka, and then lying down peacefully to die. It was a mass suicide organized by the members of the cult and carried out with exacting precision. The reason they wanted to kill themselves wasn't in protest or even in bleak depression. They were convinced by their leader Marshall Applewhite that their spirits would catch a ride in a spaceship that was travelling behind the Hale-Bopp comet, and the only way to get on it was to die as it passed Earth. Some say Applewhite's obviously dangerous psychiatric state was exacerbated by Nettles as they journeyed around America together, hatching this plan to create a religion and gather followers. In the end, they were convinced that they were the two witnesses mentioned in the books of the Bible, and their bodies were now only vessels for a higher being. But after Nettles died from cancer in 1985, things took a dark turn for the cult. It went from an idyllic organisation to one gravely focused on ultimate control and then eventually suicide. Applewhite's depression then caused a change in the cult's doctrine, and now the ascension previously promised as a full-body UFO experience would now only be spiritual, meaning suicide. Authorities were baffled when they found the bodies stinking up the mansion in Santa Fe because the scene was just so peaceful and organised. But videotape surfaced of all the members of the cult detailing their explanations for cooperation in a twisted video suicide note. They were inexplicably happy, and many people just couldn't understand why things had gone so badly. Multiple castrations, constant required humming, regimented diet and exercise, identical clothes, shoes and haircuts, constant compulsory expressions of joy, forced celibacy, and frequent and compulsory enemas are just some of the other weird requirements of this cult. You know, not including the suicides and all. Was Marshall Applewhite a schizophrenic manipulated by his nurse? Was Bonnie Nettles also mentally damaged and just as malleable? Was their mutually enabling relationship toxic to the members of the cult? Did Bonnie's death spark a dark path for Heaven's Gate towards mass suicide? Did they truly believe that there was a spaceship, or was it just a game of control for Applewhite and Nettles? Why have there not been more cults like this since? Was this a mind control experiment, or did these people willingly volunteer for castration and then later death? Or was this just a sad story of two disturbed people who had a great tale that broken people could lay their faith on to create a community of social misfits? So join us, co-conspirators, as we slip on the black Nike sneakers of exploration, mix up the applesauce of truth, and prep the away team for departure as we leave our vessels to meet T on the spacecraft and experience divine human individual metamorphosis in the evolutionary level above human. That's right, this time, on those conspiracy guys, it's the Heaven's Gate cult. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Those Conspiracy Guys. This time we're talking about Marshall and Bonnie and the Heaven's Gate suicide cult. It wasn't called that until after they all committed suicide, obviously, but that's what it's
just a cult.
Spoiler alert. That's what it's affectionately known as. If you've clicked on this link, beware. There's going to be lots of talk of suicide and stuff like that. So I mean, don't go fucking complaining to anybody that it was about suicide. Yeah. That sound you hear is Edwin Salmon for some reason.
Humming Suicide is Painless.
Oh.
From MASH.
I didn't hear
the TV show about suicidal soldiers. I don't know, I never watched it.
Great comedy though.
I think originally it was written for either the movie or the TV show, and it had lyrics. Oh. But the lyrics were too depressing. They were like, so
put it in applesauce.
But they liked the tune, so they just kept the tune. But the name of the song is Suicide is Painless. Not if you jump off a bridge.
Yeah, or like sexually immolate yourself like a Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
It's not at all painless. But this episode we're going to be talking about Heaven's Gate and a whole bunch of people in a big house in California decided to catch a ride on a comet's tail and killed themselves and jumped into the sky, apparently.
What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. And joining me on this interstellar adventure, we have the Redness himself, old school with a K, Eamon O'Neill. Welcome to the studio.
Hello. Musical interlude.
I think it's a sound machine. Yeah, it's awesome.
I'm the human science fiction soundboard.
He's going to start whistling Gene Roddenberry. And the human soundboard himself, beard wearer and lover of many things star, both Trek and Wars.
Yes.
Edwin Salmon.
Stand clear. Edwin Samming operator. I got my own name wrong there. Samming. No, that's I verbalized my own name.
Edwin Samming.
When I'm doing stuff, I'm not Edwin Samming. I'm Edwin Samming.
Yeah. And then when you've done stuff, you're Edwin Sammed.
I'm Sammed. Oh, I'm Sammed out, man.
He Sams, she Sams, we all Sam.
He Sams seashells by the Sam shore.
And welcome to the studio. It's been mere days since we've had you in. The Mormons episode that we did the last time got a lot of traction.
It did.
Got a lot of carry on going on. And this one, again, another cult, maybe less regarded as the international religion of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but nonetheless, it is still very famous. And one of the, I think after Jonestown and the Manson family, one of the most famous, cults, I would say.
Famous, high end, cause you know when a cult does something, it's like blip, clips. Then these guys are up there.
Their star really did shine, pun not intended, but
Tesco finest cults.
Yeah, these are the finest cults of meat that you can find.
Not your everyday value cults.
Yeah.
And nice cultiness. They're not going after people. They're not doing mean things. They're actually, or at least it seems like their hearts are in the right place.
They were fishers of men, and I think when we went through the Charlie Manson episode, we talked about how Manson being preyed on the weak and vulnerable, but in a kind of a predatory, kind of pimp way, and Charlie had a kind of a pimp's mentality where he would find someone who was on the outskirts or the fringes of society, and at the time he was collecting up people, it was drug addicts or people who'd been abused as young people who left home and were living in the streets and they were all on acid and hanging around. Or with Jonestown, it was people who were disaffected with everyday life and they wanted to find something in Jesus, and there was an integration. It was people who were against racism, so there was black people and white people and Hispanics all in the People's Temple for Jones, and people were joined together and they were all in love, and it was this is brilliant, we're not racist. Oh wait a minute, we all have to kill ourselves. Fuck, wrong one.
Yeah, there's always a catch.
Yeah, it just seemed like they were united against something and together only in that unification. It wasn't a true bonding of.
Yeah, it wasn't the United Colours of Benetton. It was the United Colours of suicide.
Yes, the United Colours of phenobarbital. But it ended up being the Jonestown thing was we're all anti-capitalist and we're anti-racist. It's that's two great things to be if you want to be that. But when you band all that together and it springs a little bit of crazy spiritualism like that, it ends up being something a little bit more insidious. I don't know.
If you leave it in the oven too long, especially.
Yeah, it gets crispy on the top.
You don't want that.
It's chewy in the middle. No good. You don't want your socialism chewy, people.
No. You want nice, smooth, no aftertaste.
So for Marshall Applewhite, we've all seen those videos of that crazy weird. He looks kind of like a gay version of Max Headroom. Some weird high Max Headroom's low poly. Just hey everybody, he has that weird pointy head.
PlayStation 2 quality.
So Marshall Applewhite looks kind of like a better quality version of that and a little bit more crazy eyes, man.
A PlayStation 3 version of Max Headroom.
Yeah, and he just put you watch the videos and he's we are about to embark on a journey, and you're that sounds like hypnotic induction fucking speech to me, my friend. Stop speaking in that weird way. Bit weird. Have you watched the videos?
I love the way he talks. I couldn't get enough of it. I was up all night watching it.
Yeah, I can see you're sitting here now with your purple shawl, and it seems a little bit. I've never seen you wear it before.
Where's the applesauce? Come on, let's get to the applesauce. I was promised applesauce.
Before
enlightenment.
You won't find it here, my friend. You won't get it here. There's dick jokes and fucking fart noises.
Yes.
So before we... Oh,
sorry,
that
my
soundboard is amazing.
My mouth just farted.
Before we get into it, I just want to tell everybody there is a GoFundMe page that has been launched, and it is to send me to America to do a TCG TV. There's 12 documentaries that I want to make. All the details are in the GoFundMe page. You can go to gofundme.com/TCGTV and check out all the details. I'm going to be starting in California and working my way across the south, up to the East Coast, hitting New York around Christmas time, and then back across through the Midwest and up to Washington, and then down the West Coast in May 2019. So it starts September 2018. The GoFundMe is up now. €75,000. I know, shocker, is the total. And I mean, the Mormons episode was released only from the recording today. It was only about 8 days ago, and it's up past 100,000 downloads now. So that's 500,000 hours of people listening. So like, it's also 100,000 people, and if everybody gave €1, that'd be more than enough. Now there's been some really, really generous people that have given like 50 and 100 and even €200 to the cause, and there are perks for each level. So there's 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, all the way up to as much as you can afford. You know, there's business consideration as well if anybody wants to get one of the episodes sponsored. There will be a daily vlog as well from the road, and you guys can help me out there. I mean, it's a huge, ambitious project. I was telling the lads about it before we started the show, and yeah, we're going to be getting a van and driving around and making those documentaries and talking to the people that we only talk about. So I mean, for this, the house is still there in California. We can go and visit it. We can go and look and see, you know, what was the Heaven's Gate all about. I would love to do that at some point, and this could be the point where I'll be able to get to do that kind of stuff. So gofundme.com/TCGTV for all the details, all the nitty gritty, the time scale, and all the extra bits are in there, and the perks as well, what you get for it. There's a special Discord for people who donate, and we can all talk together. There's meetups and stuff in the US as well, and then
you get a vial of your blood if you give.
It's a small, like the Angelina Jolie,
Billy Bob thing. Yeah. I've got one.
You've got one of mine?
Yeah.
How the fuck did you get that?
You're deeply.
And so I mean, just GoFundMe. Just at the start of the show, I just want to tell you about that, and hope that you can help the show out. I'll say it again at the end just in case you forgot. But please go have a look now. You can download the GoFundMe app and keep in on the messages and stuff like that. I'll be sending updates as well. So that's for Heaven's Gate. Like, when you were looking up, what did you know of it before?
I'd read when I first heard of it. I'd read a article in I can't remember, it was Vanity Fair or one of them highfalutin magazines.
Yeah, Woman's Way.
Yeah. I just read about it, and I had a series of haunting still images from the testimonies, the video testimonies, if you want to call them that. And I'd never heard of it before.
There's so much footage online, but very little written.
Yeah.
When I went, I usually do the majority of my research is done maybe weeks or months in advance before the day that I'm watching documentaries. I get a general sense of what the episode is going to be, and I make a note as I go along. Oh, that's quite interesting. And then the actual, like, maybe 3 days before the episode, I'll horse in and open up like 250 tabs and read and pull all the information out. I couldn't open more than 80 tabs on this thing. Like, there's not, and most of them were, like, not most, but a lot of them were from the Heaven's Gate website itself. So watching those documentaries, it's first-hand experience, like first-hand information coming from the mouths of the people in the fucking cult.
Yeah.
That was really disturbing for me. Because you know, like, they're going, I've made up my mind to kill myself, and I'm smiling, and I've shaved my head, and everything's cool.
Well, the article I read was one of those, I guess you'd call it a long read now, because these days anything more than a Love in Dublin sized article is a long read. But it was, like, it was someone writing about these people, and it just, I was kind of saddened by it. It was just kind of sad. And
did you look at those people and think, "Ah, you poor bastard, you don't even know what you're at"? Like,
yeah, it was just. I mean, but in this fascinating stuff, like, you know, because those aspects of human nature are fascinating. It's like, you know, why are there serial killers, or you know, but people joining cults,
anything on the outlier kind of area of normality,
because they want to belong. They want to belong to something, and they want their lives to have meaning.
It's amazing the amount of bullshit you're willing to accept, or the amount of let's say factless information that you're willing to accept
on faith
for community
alone,
just to sync up with people.
They just want to be with people.
But it's the weirdest thing about it is, like, I didn't know that Heaven's Gate were the UFO. I thought that was like the same way people would say, oh yeah, he's like a tinfoil hat wearing person. Like, that was kind of like the crazy part of it. Like, these people who try to get onto a UFO and have to kill themselves to leave their bodies, I thought that was like, oh, that's like the general sort of cult madness.
Yeah,
I originally didn't
generic
know.
Cookie cutter cult.
Yeah, like, I didn't know it was actually, oh, these are the guys
Someone
that kind of
signing up.
it.
Is this one of these? We kill our mortal bodies in order to transcend to the aliens type cult, or one of the other types?
Is this one of the ones where you eat a little piece of bread and drink the wine and pretend it's somebody's body?
No. No.
I'm
not interested in that kind of cult at all. I'm into more of
the poison applesauce ones.
Yeah, where we go into a spaceship.
Applesauce, Kool-Aid, whatever you have.
But thanks for calling round.
I take the magazine though, thanks.
Exactly.
So, did you think when you were like looking into it, like, I didn't think this was a real thing, I thought it was like a trope?
Yeah, I thought it was like a sort of a meme in the consciousness, just one of those things that people said, and then you look into it and you're like, oh, this is every bit as kind of, from a purely human level, it's every bit as kind of, oh no,
it seems
as
like
you thought that it was. You know, you're like,
it seems
oh
like a
no.
Hitchhiker's Guide kind of thing, you know, when they have to stick their thumb out and they end up then transporting onto the things. Like, why didn't you just get like a magic ring or whatever?
Yeah, there's ways to do it. It's like in that Simpsons episode with the leader, and he has a big spaceship in the barn, but then he's just like cycling it, and it's all.
Don't look behind the curtain.
Yeah. But I mean, he could have done that. He could have done it that way. You know what I mean? It's like there's a reason for the applesauce. That's what I'm going to say. Geez, there's a slogan for it. There's a reason for the applesauce.
Any applesauce people out there who want to buy that line for your advertising campaign?
Sometimes it's good with pork. Other times it's good for trying to transcend your mortal body and land on a spaceship that's coming along with the Haley Bob comet.
Yeah, and Jesus did put the demons into the pigs before he sent them off the cliff. It's probably some sort of connection there. As you eat the demon and you can sort of go off. Maybe
that's why the Muslims don't like it.
They're not into it at all.
That's where the phrase "escape pig" came from.
Yeah,
as we all know.
You can use a spaceship, but use the Force, or you can eat some applesauce. That's the jingle.
God, I must get some pork tonight for dinner.
This applesauce is tasty. It's all Disney branded applesauce now.
You the same people gonna die? Shut up, Jar Jar, and eat your fucking applesauce.
Please eat your applesauce.
Please. We don't want to listen to you anymore.
So, like, I remember being like on the news a little bit when it happened. It was a little bit. Right.
It was almost like a funny story at the end of the news.
Yeah, it was the like same year as Princess Diana died, and I remember that vividly. And Heaven's Gate was on. It was just
Teresa
like,
as well.
Here's a squirrel on skis, and some weird people wrapped themselves up in purple cloth, and they were dead. But all we saw was the outside of the house, and we saw like one of those rare enough sights that you would see. It's an ambulance that is actually fitted out like a bread van. Because it's not just like for one bed, it's got like 4 beds in each wall, and there are like a load of ambulances coming along just like, pack them in. They don't have to be fresh, just don't squeeze the big ones. Like, and they were just pumping lads into these ambulances and driving them off. 39 people died in this house, killing themselves, right? Spoilers. And it like, to me, I was like, oh, that's shocking. But at the same time, you know, Bill Clinton was hammering fucking rockets at Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
like he
was a strong president.
He was, I'm just Are they black or brown? No, they're white. What are we firing missiles at them for? You know, it's just okay, Hillary, I'll do it. Okay, like it's just one of those things where it just flew past me.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, and I remembered when I started the research, I was like, it was a few years later, because your memory has started to trick you. The videos of inside the house, where you're in the bunk beds and you see the feet and all that stuff, like all of those things that all came out were a while after. It wasn't on the day that you saw like the lads lying in the bed with the Nike runners and the black suits and the like. That didn't come out straight away. It was just like outside, and we're like, we don't know what to tell people. People will freak out. Like, this is a thing that's never happened before, except for Jonestown. And like a mass suicide. It was the biggest mass suicide on American soil in American history. Like, that's a huge thing.
Yeah, because at the time it was tied in with the comet, and there was news about that, and then it was almost like, and these silly people thought that there was a spaceship riding the coattails of this comet that